All right, everyone, we'll start. Today's the demo. On Monday, we went over the concepts that we're going to go over today. This Zoom camera is off. All right. Um, so I'll review a little bit of what we covered towards the end of lecture on Monday. We'll start with the terminal. So we had a few commands that we were going over. You guys remember we have ls, which gives us a list of everything in our current directory. CD to change the directory. In this case, I'm going into desktop, and in there, I'm going into app dev. From here, I have these things. I want to go into, actually, I did not want to go into app dev. Here, I can CD into the backend course. And then change directory into demo one. Okay. So at this point, if you guys remember from the lecture, we have a command called code dot, which is built into VS Code and will open the folder you're in VS Code. If you don't have that installed, there is a way to do that through VS Code. Otherwise, you can open up VS Code, find the project directory on this left side right here, and open it that way. And so I'll just get started. We have our app.py and we have our, I'll make this a little bit bigger for you guys. So if you guys remember, we have to open up our terminal. You can open up your terminal in VS Code, which is what I usually like to do. And this will automatically bring you to the directory you're in. From here, we have to first create our virtual environment. And so this is Python. So this is the command to make our virtual environment. If you guys don't remember, a virtual environment will hold all our requirements, and that will like contain different frameworks. So if this project might use certain frameworks that another project would conflict with, and so this will load all those things into just this exact project here. So if you see on the left side, we just created this virtual environment folder, and then to activate, it's we need .them /bin/activate. And I know it's different if you're on a Windows. You can just do a quick Google search. It should come up, them activate. So now you can see this little them thing on this left side here. That tells us that we've activated. The next thing is to install our requirements. And so we're using pip install -r. R is a flag just for installing this recursively. You don't really need to worry about that. And then we have our, actually, this isn't going to work because we're not inside of our starter folder, and that's where requirements lies. So we'll first cd into starter, and then when we run our previous command here, we'll, okay. Oh, requirements. You'll see where it's installing all these requirements. From here, we're able to run our app. And so that's Python app.py. Whoops. Yeah. Port 800 is being used. It's running port 700. Okay. Run this again. 700 is also used. So port 5000, Mac ended up using for some control in your control center, which is not ideal. Normally 5000 is left open. And so use 5000 would work on Windows. On Mac, it doesn't. So if you're on Mac, switch it to 800. I'm just using 5001. So now if I wanted to open this up, we can go to Postman, which, what just happened? Here we go. And in Postman, we can, make a route. So add this request. And here, we'll add this get request. We'll send it. And if you see right here, I'll zoom in a little bit. It says hello world. And so that's coming from this VS Code window right here. Okay. If you see, we got that route hit, we had a status code of 200. That's just the default success response. So we also want to add other routes to our backend. And so we first will, so the server is currently running. We can still code, but nothing will change until we save and the server updates. So to start off, we want to, we'll talk about what this project does. So the idea of this project is we want to create, let's say like tasks that we want to finish throughout the week. So we want to be able to create tasks that we have. We want to be able to delete tasks that maybe we've done. We want to be able to update tasks. Let's say I want to do laundry, and then I also realize I want to I need to move it from the washer to the dryer. So I might want to update that task. And so if you guys remember CRUD, create, retrieve, update, delete, we can create tasks, we can retrieve all our tasks, we can update our tasks, and we can delete our tasks. And so that's what we're going to be doing this app.py here. If at any point you guys have questions, raise your hand up high. I'll stop and ask any questions. I don't want you guys falling behind and not understanding what's going on. So I'll get started with first showing you guys what a task might look like. If you guys remember, we're using these JSON responses. A JSON is just a format for a string. So a task we'll first define, if you remember, it looks like a dictionary. So we'll start defining what an example of a task would be. First, we're going to have an ID number, and an ID is always unique. So every task will have its own ID. They can never be the same. It would cause issues on your backend. So ID, we'll start with, here we go. So if you remember, it's always a string. So we have ID of string as the key, and then we'll have a value of 0 for the ID. From there, maybe we want a description of what our task is. So we can add description. And maybe we'll start off with just laundry. I want to do laundry this week. And you guys are welcome to follow along your computer. If you guys don't want to code and just follow along and understand what I'm doing, this will all get posted on our app dev YouTube channel. So you can always refer back to this. I'll continue with, we want to know if our task has been done or not. So we'll have a done field, and we'll obviously have this as a Boolean. So we'll start it as false, or it is not done. And that might be our first task. Then we'll do a second task. We'll have this as an ID of 1. So in this case, ID, our field here, will equal 1. Then we're going to have a new description. Let's say I also want to get my homework done for this week. And we'll say this is also not yet done. So we'll set done equal to false. Okay, so at this point, this is what our dictionary would look like for our tasks. Now, this is similar to what a JSON would look like. A JSON is just this as a string. It gets formatted easily, and then we can then convert it to a dictionary and easily work that in Python. The other thing we need is we need to keep track of what we actually want our new IDs to be, because we can never repeat an ID. So in this case, we're going to make a variable. We're going to call this task ID counter, and we're going to set this equal to 2. Because when we make our next task, we don't want 0 or 1 ever being used. Instead, we'll use 2, and we'll keep incrementing that as we create new tasks. So we always have a unique ID for all our tasks. Now I'll continue by making our first useful route. And this is going to be to get all our tasks. So from here, we want to, if you guys remember, Flask is the framework we're using. So it uses an @app.route, and then it allows you to specify the routes that would route to the method that we're going to be creating here. This method we're going to call, we'll call it get tasks. And this will get us all our tasks. And so in here, you'll specify what the route is. We'll allow a slash. So if you have just your URL, like this HTTP with your port at the end, and then just a slash after it, it would route to this. And you can also specify multiple routes that will route to this get tasks method. So maybe you also want tasks. From here, we can write what we actually want to return. In this case, we're going to make our JSON. And so we want our result, which we'll call res, and we'll make this equal to, we'll call it tasks, and this is what it's going to return. And then we want a list of all our tasks dot values. From here, we want to return this. And because we want to convert this dictionary to a JSON, there's this new import we need. If you scroll to the top where we have our imports, we're going to want to import request. And this comes from Flask. So from Flask, import request. And this will allow us, and then we're also going to need to import JSON. So we're going to import JSON. So these are two new things that we're going to be using in our app.py. This JSON we're going to use right now. We want to return this res or result as a JSON. So JSON has two useful functions we're going to use. JSON.dumps is what converts it from a dictionary into the JSON list that we want to return. So when we're giving something to our front end, we dump it into a JSON, and then they can use that in whatever way is easiest for them to process. And at the end, we always put our status code. So our status code for any successful response is going to be 200. So now at this point, I'm going to save my app.py. You'll see in our terminal, it reruns. And then when we go to our Postman and we want to rerun this endpoint, we want now /tasks. And it gives us all our tasks. So if you see right here, I'll make this bigger. So we have task 0 is laundry and it's not done. We have homework and it is also not done. We'll go back to our code. So that's our first route, right? So that's our get tasks. Then we also want other useful routes. We'll go on to creating a task. So how do we create a task? Well, again, we're going to have to make our route. So app.route. And we'll give this a route of also tasks. At this point, we have two routes under tasks. And so how are we able to differentiate between what this method does and what this is going to do? Well, because this is a creating tasks, so we'll call this create task. We're going to need to give it information. So because we're giving it information, it is a post request. So when we're creating something, we need to provide that information. So what actually happens is in this app.route, you have to add the method. So if you remember from the lecture on Monday, the methods are get, post, and delete. Post is when you want to give it information. So we'll say method equals, and it takes in a list. In this case, we just want it to allow post. Okay. The reason we didn't need to specify that here in the first one we made is because it'll automatically assume that it's a get method if we don't say anything. So if it's not a get method, we need to specify what methods are allowed. In this case, it's post. So if it's a post method, it'll route us to this create task function rather than this get tasks function. Okay. From here to create a task, first we want to load in this task ID counter we had. So to do that, it's global task ID counter. Oops. Task ID counter. From there, we want to get the information we have. So if you remember for post request, we give it request data. So we're going to call this the body, and this is going to equal JSON.loads. So what happens is front end is going to give us a JSON, and we need to convert that into a dictionary that we can modify in Python. So loads is like the opposite of dumps. Dumps goes from dictionary to JSON. Loads goes from JSON to dictionary. And so from here, we want to load our request.data. So request comes in because this is a post. And so we're getting this request.data, which is going to come in from the front end, or in our case from Postman. And then we can parse through this body. So the first thing we want is a description. And the description will make it equal to body.get description. Next, we're also going to need a, what else do we need? That's actually the only information we need. So from there, we can make our task. So we'll call it task, and it'll equal, as remember, this is a dictionary. So in this case, it has an ID. The first thing is we'll add an ID. This is going to be equal to the task ID counter that we had. And then we're also going to use our description. In this case, description. The first one is our string, and the second one is our description. That's a variable of what was passed into us. And the last thing we need is to specify that this is not yet done. So this is always going to be set to false when we first start creating a task. From here, we actually want to add this task right here to our list of all our tasks. So to do that, we want tasks, and this is at the location of our task ID counter. And now this will just be equal to task. So at this point, we've added our new tasks to the dictionary. What do we want to do now? Well, we want to update task ID counter, because again, we never want any IDs on our backend to be the same. They're all supposed to be unique. So what we can do is task ID counter plus equals 1. Okay. Now we want to return that we've successfully created a task. And so again, we're returning a JSON dot dumps, and this is going to dump our task. And now, so 200 success response is when something was done successfully. And then there's also a 201 response, which is also success, but it means something was created. So in this case, we want to use a 201 response. And so the reason we're JSON.dumps this task is because we've actually added more information. We have now that it's false, and we have its ID. So even though the front end gave us the description that we're using, we still are trying to add more information and then giving that back to them. So at this point, this method is done. We can then go back to Postman, and I do need to save the code first. So if you see on the bottom, we're rerunning with the newly updated code because I just saved it. And then if we go back to Postman here, this request was our get tasks. And we want now a new request. So we go to our collection here, we type add request. So this request will use the same URL. We'll put that URL here. This is actually a post request. So we have to change this right here, be post. And in our body, this is where we now can put in the information that we're passing along. We want to put in as raw data and then change this to be the type JSON. So as remember, what this looks like is a key that's a string, and then another value as a string. And so in this case, we want to add a new description. Maybe we want to say sleep. I need to remember to sleep tonight. So I'll put in sleep. And this will be a task for really late tonight, and it's not done yet. I'll have to update this in the morning, probably. I'll send this off. If I can move this over. So I'll hit send. As you see, we have right here 201 created. 201 is our status code. And then here's what we got back. We got this JSON back. As you see, we have a new ID, ID2, and we got the done being false. Okay. At this point, we'll go back to our code, and we want to add more methods to this. So we've got our get tasks, we've got create tasks. Now, what if we want to get a specific task? So to do that, it is very similar. We're going to start off with, again, app.route. In this case, we want our /tasks/. Now, to get a task, it's also going to be a get because we just want to get information from our backend. But how do we know which task to get? So in this case, we get to do something really special where we put information into our URL. And so the way this looks is actually you put in this less than equal sign, and then int, and then a colon. And then you specify what you want this variable to be called. Then your greater than sign, and then your final slash. You always have that slash at the end. This is the this is what it looks like when you want to pass in a variable and give it a name within your route. So then we can go into our function here. We want to get task, just a single task. And we actually want to pass in this task ID variable from our route into our function. And so this is what Flask does, where we're able to get this from a URL and actually pass it in as a variable. From here, we want to get the task that's specific to this task ID. So what we'll say task equals tasks dot get, and we'll say task ID. Okay. At this point, this task may or may not exist. Yes.
Oh, why do you do app.route for every?
So yeah, that's what Flask does, is maps every route to a function so that when you hit a route, it knows exactly like what exactly you want the backend to do.
So you can't have like more than one function like per route.
Yeah, you can have many routes point to one function, but a single function or a single route will only always ever do one thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's just for consistency. You don't want to hit a route and have different possibilities of what it could do. You want to hit a route and know exactly what you have to give it and exactly what you're going to get back, right? Yeah.
So can you like have other functions in that function?
Yeah, so as soon as you start with this app.route, the next line, and so this at makes it a decorator. And then you have this function here. This define is we're just at this point is normal Python. If you want to define a function and inside define another function or do other stuff unrelated to backend, you can do whatever you want here. Well, the main goal of Flask is just to route this to a specific function, and then you can do whatever backend work you want to do. From here, we're going to get our task, right? This task may or may not exist. If I passed in a task ID of 10, we're not going to actually find a task. So what we want to do is we want to handle that case. If not task, what's going to happen? Well, we want to return another JSON.dumps as always. In this case, we want to return a dictionary. And what we want is to actually say that there was an error. So we'll type out error. And what this error is going to be, we'll say task not found. At this point, we also need to add a status code. So a status code for when something is not found. I don't know if you guys are familiar. You hit a URL that doesn't actually work. It's a 404 error. You guys might have seen that surfing around on the web. So that handles our situation if we find a task or if we try to find a task that isn't there, that route does not exist. If we do find a task, we want to return a success response. So in this case, we'll return our JSON.dumps, and we want to put in our task, which is already in the form of a dictionary, and we want our success response. In this case, we're not creating anything new. It's just a regular success response. We'll put in 200. Okay. We'll save this. I'll go back to Postman. From here, we can use, I'll actually make a new route so I don't change my previous routes. It's this same URL, except for the last bit, where we actually want to specify a specific task. So maybe I want to get the first task number 0, right? That was laundry. We got it. We could do 1 all the way up to 2. And what happens if we go to 3? Well, then we get our error task not found. If you see our status code right here, it gives us a 404 not found. That's not a valid URL. Okay. Any questions up to this point? Yeah.
When you resaved it, did it get rid of our old pathway names?
Yeah. So obviously, like when you're actually making a backend in a production setting, this isn't how we're structuring it. Every time you save it, the only stuff that's actually going to be saved is what's in your app.py file. So you're going to be losing the information that you passed in through Postman. If I did want to post this to the backend, I can now create this task, sleep. This gives us a success response. So this was just created. I go back to here and I try to run this task with task ID 2, and it'll find sleep. Okay. Yeah. The task URL. Okay. Yeah. If you go to your code, whoops. Here, whenever you run your server, it'll tell you exactly what URL you're running from. if I change this, I save it. Okay. So Control C will close, or will stop running your app. Then you run the app again. You get this right here. So it's at the top. This is your local host, and then the 5001 will be your port. This could be 8,000, 5,000, whatever the port is. Right?
You want to show them just running, like typing localhost on Postman as well?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is when I say this is your local host, it's exactly your local host. So when I go to Postman and you want to change this, you can just type in local host and it'll hit the same thing. I had saved my task, so obviously we don't see it anymore. But localhost is the exact same. If you don't want to have to remember that 127.0.0.1, you can just type in localhost and use the port that you're on. The port you're on is also going to be visible at the bottom. It's specified right here. And so that's how you're going to get your routes. Obviously, if you have something added to the end, that'll be specified in this part where we have app.route. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. We'll continue. The next thing we want to do from CRUD, create, update. We want to be able to update a task, right? So let's say we want to change something in a task. Well, again, I'm going to start with app.route. Tasks. Oops. And then we always are going to only want to update a specific task. There'll be no situation where we want to update all our tasks. So we're going to do the same thing we did in our previous route, where we pass in an integer and give it the name task ID. And so this will be the task that we're updating. So we're going to define our update task. Again, we're passing in task ID as a parameter, and then we get to start working on our update task function. So in this case, we want to, again, get our task. So we're going to say task equals tasks.get, and we're going to pass in the task ID. Oops. Then again, we have to check if this task exists. So if not task, we can do this same thing here. The task is not found. Again, we want to return an error. That's not a valid URL. And then we want to get information, right? So when we're updating a task, we're changing the description. So what actually is happening is this is another post request because we want to get more information. And so we have to go back into our app.route and add that the method we're using is, in this case, post. Okay. So that means that we now have this request.body that's getting passed into us. And so, sorry, request.data. So we're calling it body. This equals JSON.loads. I want to pass in request.data. Okay. So now from our body, we want to update the description. So we can call this new description. This will equal body.get description. From here, we want to actually put this new description into our task. So what we're going to do is task, we're going to call description. And this is going to equal new description. And then the other update we could do is whether the task is done or not. So let's say we don't want to update the description and we only want to update that the task is done. So maybe we want this task description to equal the new description. And if there is no new description, then we can keep it as is. So one way to do that is this body.get description and then give it a default value if that description value is not found. So what we would do is we would just put in task description as the default. So in this case, we can pass in a description and it becomes optional. Let's say we just want to say that the task is done and we don't want to actually change the description, then this new description will just end up equaling our old description. Then we set the task description equal to the optionally new description. We also want to update if the task is done or not. So we'll say task done equals body done. Actually, we want to use body.get because this is what allows us to set that default value. And then if there is no done value in our request, we want to be able to say that it's going to be equal to what it previously was. Whoops. Okay, so this is what makes this description and done both optional. What we'll do is I'll show you guys how to either update one, update both, update. I guess you would not update neither. So I'll go from here to Postman. Oh, I did forget. We actually want to return our newly updated task. So from here, we return our JSON.dumps, and we have our task. And obviously this was successful if we got to this point. So we'll give it a status code of 200. I'll run this and go back to here. And we're going to make a new request. This is post. I'm going to start naming these just so we remember what these are. This was create a task. This was get a specific task. And this one's going to be update task. From here, I'm going to copy this, put this in our URL, right? We're always going to be updating a specific task. We'll start with task 0. So if we first get all our tasks, we'll see we have 0 is the laundry and 1 is homework. Let's say we want to update our laundry to be done. We have to go to our body. This is a post request because we're actually passing in information. We change this to be a JSON and we can update done to be equal to true. Okay, we can send this. What we see is this laundry got changed and now the status of being done is now true, right? The other alternative is to change the description. You can change the description. Maybe you want to be more specific and call it the actual washing part of the laundry when we want to separate the washing and drying part. We'll send this and we'll see this got changed to washing. And then lastly, you can change both. So we can do description and done. These will now both get updated. Let's say we want to say that washing was done, but maybe the drying is not yet done. So we'll say this is now false. We'll send this as an update and we see drying is now false right here. So this update is very useful for changing any of our fields. We can change if a task is done or not. We can change the description of a task.
Yeah. So in our, when we're posting it, we're posting the JSON as done as like a string of true, but in our dictionary, it's like a boolean. Does that matter?
Yeah. So you always, because from Postman, you're always using JSON. It's always going to be a string. On the back end, the JSON dot dumps and loads is what converts it to a dictionary, and then you get that value of true and false. Yeah.
Are these files going to be shared with them?
This is all recorded. We'll be posting it to our AppDev YouTube channel. I can make an ed discussion post with the link so you can watch this back. That's what I'm saying. If you guys want to just follow along and not code right now, you guys will be able to code this all up using this recording later on. Any other questions? Yeah. So for the most part, we always use post. If you want to be like correct, a post is used when you're actually creating information. A put is used when you're changing an entire item, and then there's actually a patch which is used to update just a specific part of an item. So you only need to worry about post because post can do all of that. In this course, we're only going to be using get for our gets. Post is going to be used for both our creating and our updating. Yeah, so that's where the update, the reason why it's separate from the retrieve is because update would be like a put usually, and those would be separated out. But we can just use post for everything in this course. Okay, any other questions? Awesome, we'll continue. The last thing we want to do in CRUD is the D for delete. So we want to be able to delete tasks. We'll go back to our code here, and we have one last route to add. Again, app.route. We'll be typing this many, many times throughout the course. I'll give it a /tasks/ And so again, for deleting a task, we don't want to delete all our tasks. We're going to want to delete specific tasks. And so we're going to, again, use this method of passing in an integer. And now a delete method is also its own method. It's not a post or a get. There's actually a specific delete method. And so again, we'll go methods equals delete. From here, we can define our function. I'm going to call this delete task. And again, we need to pass in this task ID. So a lot of this is going to be similar. You want to get our task, and if there's no task, return this. I'll copy this from what we have before. That's going to stay the same. And then we want to otherwise actually delete the task. And so we have the delete, and then we go into our dictionary and we have this task ID. Right? And so why do we save task as as its own variable? Well, what we actually want to return after deleting this is that task that we just deleted, right? Maybe we want to delete a task, but we want to see that information one last time before it gets deleted. There's no reason in just deleting it and not having any content when we're giving a response back. So we might as well return this last post that we're deleting. So we'll return the JSON dot dumps. We'll give it that task. And this was successful. So we'll give it 200 code. Okay. At this point, we can go back to our Postman. We now have yet another request. So on the left side here, this little tiny get should really be updating to whatever it says here. For some reason, it's not.
You just save it.
Oh, saving. Okay. Save. Okay. So now this new request, we're going to call this delete task. Same routes as before. And we just need to change this as to be a delete, right? It's highlighted red. We're deleting. Oh no, let's delete our first task. It gets us that laundry. What if it was done or not? The ID. This was deleted. Let's try to get all our tasks. So we see here. This was for our previous call. We had laundry and we had homework. At this point, we now only have homework. So if you see, the task ID is 1, and our task ID counter, even though we're deleting a task, will remain at 2. Just because we deleted a task doesn't mean we want to decrement that counter, because all of a sudden we cause an issue where we might end up with going back to an ID that we'd already previously used. So we never decrement the counter, and we'll always be increasing that to make sure that every ID always ends up being unique. With that, we're done with all our CRUD endpoints. And so we have all our Postman requests. We've tested it at our app works. We now have a solid working backend for an app that will keep track of our tasks for the day or for the week. And now the last thing I want to do is export this Postman collection. And so when you'll be submitting a CMS, you'll be submitting your app.py as well as a Postman collection. And this just shows that you tested your app, you know it works. And so to do that, we go to this collection and we're gonna export. Just click that, and then you'll be submitting that on CMS. And that shows that you've tested your app, it works, everything's looking good. Do we have any questions? Okay, yeah. So the last thing I want to do is we want to actually, and this should have been done as I was going, we want to add a little documentation about what each of our apps does, or what each of our routes does. So for this one, get tasks, we want to add documentation here. We'll say get all tasks. Something short, brief. You don't even need articles, but this route gets all tasks. We want to actually add that for all of them. It's 3 quotes, enter, and then in between, this is where you write your documentation. And so this allows people who are reading what you wrote to understand easily what each task does. Obviously, this is pretty basic because we have a create task as the name of our function. So when we say this creates a task, that could have been easily inferred. But obviously, as we get into more complicated routes, you really want to provide good documentation so people know what you're actually doing. At this point, it might seem a little bit silly to provide this documentation, but we really encourage it. And we will be taking points off if there is no documentation because it's really important. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if it's just like there's nothing there, but above the first one, we have get task. There's like an extra route of like that thing that we do there.
Yeah, so it is not needed, but I'll show you what it does. So when we go back to Postman, this get tasks, right? We should have both our task specs because I just saved my app.py. We have both our tasks. That app.route actually allows you to route multiple URLs to a single function. So if we do just that one slash, we actually oh, okay. So I actually have conflicting because I never deleted the hello world. If you look up here, if I delete this, save this, go back to Postman, and I just use this one slash, we'll also be able to route to that same function. So it just allows you to map multiple URLs to a function. Yeah. Okay.